Alright guys, this video is for those of you out there that have a dog or dogs that either pull on the leash or bark at people when you don't want them to. And how do we stop that behavior? First, what we need to do is we need to think about what it is that the dog is trying to do, or what is their outcome or result from doing a certain behavior. So if I have a dog and that dog goes into a sit and I give that dog a piece of food, that's going to encourage that dog to go back into the sit again. But what about behaviors that we don't want? Now, we have what's called self-rewarding behaviors. This is going to be a behavior that is rewarding. The behavior itself is fun to do. So whether or not you reward the dog or correct the dog for a self-rewarding behavior, since the behavior itself is fun, they're going to continue to do that behavior unless we show them or tell them that they're not supposed to do it. So again, we want to think about the dog decides to do a behavior, they do the behavior, it results in some sort of outcome which determines whether or not that dog will do the behavior again. So we need to look at it in that perspective. If the dog does a behavior and it makes them feel good, then they're more likely to repeat that behavior. If a dog has fun chasing people or barking at other dogs, that behavior itself feels good for the dog, then they're going to continue that behavior. This is no different than if you had kids and I told you I want you to get your kids to stop playing video games, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to ignore them while they're playing games, and the moment they stop playing games, we're going to give them money. Well, that's not going to get them to stop the behavior of playing games, because playing games is fun. If you didn't want them to play games, you'd have to create some sort of deterrent, or you'd have to show them that playing games is not valuable or won't add any value to their life. You have to do something in order to curb that behavior. You can't just ignore it since it's a fun behavior. So this is the same with dogs. So you have to determine, okay, I don't want my dog barking at other people. So we always want to remember that we have 1 second to influence a dog's behavior. So 1 second to reward them, or 1 second to correct them for a behavior we want them to repeat or not to repeat. And this is also why we use condition reinforcers or condition corrections. Condition reinforcer predicts the primary reward, which is food, toy, or affection. Condition correction predicts the actual primary correction, which could be anything that creates some sort of deterrent for the dog. Some people may have a container filled with coins that they shake. The dog doesn't like the noise. That becomes a deterrent, or that becomes something the dog wants to avoid. And if a certain behavior predicts that outcome, the dog stops doing that behavior that predicts that outcome. And it doesn't matter what it is as long as it works, because remember, we want to focus on the science of dog training. So if, for example, let's say I'm using a leash pop. My dog has a martingale collar on. My dog does a behavior I don't like. I say no, and then I pop the leash, giving the dog a physical correction. That's going to be positive punishment. The dog doesn't like that correction, so the dog stops the behavior. But the dog's motivation to prevent the correction from happening must override the motivation to do the negative behavior. This is no different from why, if you think about why do most people choose not to rob the bank? Because the motivation not to go to jail overrides the motivation to make a quick buck. But there are some people out there who would rather risk going to jail to make that quick buck. So each dog is going to vary. Some dogs I might do a leash pop, and that's going to get them to stop the behavior. They don't want to do the behavior anymore because they don't want to be corrected. But there's other dogs where that may not work. So you have to be creative and figure out what it is that's going to get my dog to stop doing this behavior that is self-reinforcing to the dog, because again, the behavior itself is fun. And most of the time when dogs are barking, as long as that behavior is not based on fear, so sometimes a dog will bark and it's because that behavior is based on fear. If it's not based on fear, then we can usually correct it out of the dog's repertoire. But this is also very important to keep in mind. You cannot correct fear-based behaviors out of a dog's repertoire. This is very important, because if a dog is doing something based on fear and we correct them at that point, then what we are doing is we are reinforcing the fear. We just said, yeah, you better be scared of that because you're going to receive a correction for it. And it's going to make it even worse, and it's going to make it harder to fix. But again, you can correct behaviors out of a dog's repertoire that are not based on fear. If my dog is chewing on the furniture, my dog enjoys chewing on the furniture, and I say no, and I give the dog a leash pop, and the dog says, well, that wasn't very pleasant, I'm not going to chew on that furniture again. It's no different than a dog biting a cactus. If a dog thinks a cactus looks like it's a tasty treat, and the dog goes and bites the cactus, and they get pricked in the mouth, they're not going to bite the cactus again. They're going to learn from that. So again, think about what it is that the dog wants to do. When they do the behavior, what is the outcome of that behavior? And you get to determine what that outcome is, which will determine whether or not the dog repeats the behavior or chooses not to do the behavior again. And this goes across the board. So lastly, if we are having a dog that is doing a certain issue that we want them to stop, whether it's chasing other people, chasing dogs, we want to set them up to fail. So I set dogs up for success so I can reward them the exact moment they do it right. But I also set dogs up to fail so I can correct them at the exact moment they do it wrong. I don't want to be surprised when my dog makes some sort of mistake. I don't want to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my dog just broke the sit stay. I want to set it up so I'm ready the exact moment the dog makes a mistake. If my dog, for example, barks when somebody knocks at the door, but I don't want my dog to bark, I'm not going to wait till somebody randomly knocks on the door and it surprises me. I'm going to have somebody who I know, a friend or whatever, come knock on the door so I'm ready, and when my dog reacts to it, I'm able to respond accordingly. I set the dog up to fail so I can correct them the exact moment they make the mistake and give them a very clear path to success. And lastly, before I wrap this video up, anytime we are using any sort of correction on a dog that relates to obedience, so we have behavioral issues and we have obedience issues. Behavioral issues are behavioral type issues. It's, for example, digging, chewing on furniture, eating Christmas tree ornaments, eating out of the trash can, drinking out of the toilet bowl. Those are going to be behavioral type issues. And those you can correct day one, as long as that behavior is not based on fear like we spoke about before. Now, if I'm correcting a dog for obedience issues, not sitting when I tell it to, not downing when I tell it to down, not coming when called, things like that, or not staying in the sit stay, I cannot correct them until a few things take place before that comes into play. So what I mean by that is, I want to make sure the dog knows the command that I'm asking them to perform. So if I say sit, my dog better know that's a sit command. If I say down, my dog better know that that means to lay down. It's my responsibility is what I mean to teach my dog to sit in the down. And there better not be any doubt in my mind that the dog actually knows those commands. Now, once I have that in place, I also want to make sure my dog knows how to turn off pressure by complying. So if I put my dog in a sit stay and my dog breaks that sit stay and I say no, I want my dog to sit back into that sit stay. And there's ways to teach that, which I explain in my online dog training program. So if my dog goes back into the sit after it breaks the position when I say no, that's showing me that that dog understands when I say sit to go into the sit position. And when they break the position, if I say no, they know how to get back into that position, showing me that they know how to turn off pressure by complying. So when we do those steps, we give the dog a clear path to success, we teach them how to turn off pressure by complying. Now it's fair to give the dog a correction for something that is related to obedience. And if you do the steps properly, even if you add a correction to your dog, you're not going to get the negative, bad responses or the bad reactions rather from my dog or from a dog that you have been using corrections incorrectly. If the dog doesn't know what's expected of them and they don't know how to turn off pressure, you're going to get that worried, fearful looking dog that's typical of somebody using any sort of corrections on their dog incorrectly. Okay, so all these things have to come into play, and if you do this correctly, it doesn't matter what the issue is, you're going to be able to problem solve and come up with a solution to be able to fix that. Again, this is why I teach the science of dog training. If you can understand the science, you can think about each situation, you can look at the dog and say, what type of motivation does this dog need in order to perform the behavior? What is this dog's bank account level? That's an analogy that I like to use. Some dogs are very rich, some are very poor. The dogs that are more rich need a higher correction than the dogs that are poor. So here's an analogy I like to use for that. If you're speeding down the highway and a police officer pulls you over and writes you a 25-cent speeding ticket, the moment they turn the corner, off you go speeding again. That 25-cent speeding ticket was not enough to get you to change the behavior. Now let's take it on the other extreme end of the spectrum, and he pulls you over and writes you a $150,000 speeding ticket. Now you're going to be stressed out. You're going to avoid the behavior completely. That's an avoidance level correction. That's a correction level so high you never want to do the behavior ever again. But let's say he gives you a $250 speeding ticket. That's enough to get you to slow down without getting you to avoid the behavior of driving. And again, this is very important. So now you have to figure out, what is your dog's bank account? How high or how low of a correction do you need to give your dog to get the proper response that you want based on the training that you are working on? And again, if you do these correctly, you can get phenomenal results. If you want to learn more, just check out my website, nateschomer.com, and it's going to have all the information you will need, as well as a free manual that you could download on my homepage. So again, nateschomer.com to learn more. Thanks for watching.